You booked it, episode 220. What's going on, everyone? Thank you for joining me today on You Booked It, the #1 podcast where you learn how to create a successful entertainment career. Have you joined the You Booked It community yet? It is your go-to entertainment career resource. Inside, you'll have direct access to Broadway performers, Emmy nominees, and people just like yourself navigating this industry. Learn from those walking the walk. Build industry relationships, access unlimited masterclasses, and learn how to book the job more consistently. Join free today. Tap the link in the show notes or go to youbookeditpodcast.com/invite to get inside. And now, let's meet today's guest. Okay, I am super excited to kick off today's episode. I've got Joe Towne on today. Joe, are you ready for this?
I am super ready. Thanks, Dean.
Beautiful. Joe is best known for his training company for actors, athletes, and corporate executives, The Performers Mindset, in which he offers workshops designed to help people retrain their brains and hone in on the tools and techniques it takes to perform at the highest levels in the before, during, and after. The Performer's Mindset combines sports psychology, science, and artistry. Whether it's preparing for an audition, shifting your mindset for script and screenwriting, shifting for a healthier work-life balance, or helping athletes to mentally prepare for the next level. Joe, that is a very concise and quick intro of who you are and what you've done, but why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself, fill in those gaps, and a little bit more about what you do as a professional in the entertainment industry?
Sure. Thanks so much, Dane. Well, I guess as a tourist, raised on the East Coast of originally New Yorker, I grew up performing. I think the first performance I probably ever did was jumping off of a couch upstate New York to a thunderous applause from about 4 people. And I think it hooked me. I think the idea of like, oh, wow, I got that kind of response. And with this size crowd, look what might be possible. I don't think I had any idea that I'd be a performer, but I did love the idea of that kind of feedback. And I think for a hot minute, I thought I was going to be a professional baseball player.
Hmm.
I grew up loving the experience of being in a stand and feeling that energy. And I loved playing baseball. I loved watching it. I loved listening to it. And I went to summer camp at Trenton State College and really improved my game. But I sprouted up pretty quickly. I think I was a little awkward in my body. And I definitely was afraid of the high inside fastball. I didn't realize my eyes may have been going and that I would probably need glasses. So that fear drove me away from baseball. And I don't think I knew what I wanted to do until I was in an English class. And my English professor asked each of us to read a monologue from Shakespeare. I think it was reading the Tomorrow Speech. And after class, he called me over and he said, you should come down and check out what we're doing in the theater. And secretly, my mom had encouraged me to try out for the school play the summer before, but I think nerves overtook me. I don't think I ever would have thought I could actually try out for the play. And so when I came down there, demystified the whole thing and I got to watch from the audience and it seemed fun. And so I was offered my very first role, which was the offstage voice I was the miracle worker. And so there was Helen Keller and Annie Sullivan, her teacher. And I was offered the role of the 7-year-old dead brother of Annie Sullivan. So my first acting job was a voiceover, which is appropriate
Great.
since we're doing this as voiceover. But I was fortunate to be in a school that had incredible arts funding and really celebrated the arts at that time. And so I ended up doing about 30 productions of theater before deciding to go off and go across the country to USC and pursue a career in film and TV. And I went to USC and was really fortunate and eventually moved back to New York to pursue a life in theater. And it was a few years before I finally made the big leap and moved back out to Los Angeles to seek working in front of the camera. I think I had fallen in love with the stage, and it was really the encouragement of one of my mentors and teachers, Gary Austin, who on a weekend intensive taking some workshops got to meet an agent. And the agent said, well, if you want to pursue TV and film, we'd love to sign you. And so I had this opportunity to move across the country and get an apartment, get a car, get a job, and have an agent, or have everything in New York except an agent. And I had been trying to start a theater company and trying to produce a play, and I made the big leap. And I was really fortunate. I got into the union within 2 months of being out here. I booked a couple of jobs, and then I hit that lull that sometimes happens where it was a long time before I worked again. But I thought those initial things really gave me some encouragement. Maybe I could do this. And I know I'm jumping around through time quite a bit, but that was my sort of origin story and falling in love with being a performer.
Yeah, I love that. Well, let's dig into this first section here. I'm excited to get into this interview. And Joe, look, I am a sucker for a good quote. What is your favorite quote you'd like to share with everyone?
The thing about favorites with me is I really loved High Fidelity. And in High Fidelity, you always got to do like top five. So I'm just going to answer that by saying here's top quote of the moment for me. And the top quote of the moment
Love it.
is this idea of doing things better than they've ever been done before. I think
Mm.
that's what's driving me. And I think there's one thing to think about that in terms of others, doing it better than other people. And there's another thing to think about doing that in regards to myself. And so there was a head coach of a football team who is he's the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. He was the coach of my alma mater, USC, Pete Carroll. And he's the one who really shared this phrase through his writing to me. And I think that a lot of it has to do with this concept of competition. And when I think about competition, I don't know about you, when I think about competition, I usually had thought about it as beating my opponent, like
Yeah.
besting others. The French definition, which compter means to best one's opponent, and it's a zero-sum game. I win, you lose. Whereas the ancient Latin definition of competition actually meant to strive together, to strive with.
Mm.
And so the origin of the word competition and the origin of the word collaboration share the same root, to strive with towards a common goal. So I apply that to this quote, which is, how can I strive with others to seek to be the best version of myself, no matter what I'm doing? Making a chai tea, auditioning, hanging out with my son. How can I do it better than I've done it before? So that's the quote that's really top of mind. And it's really a big thrust of my podcast and our company and what I'm seeking personally.
Oh, that's fantastic. How can I strive with others, to be the best that I can be? I love that. So really good and profound. And thanks for sharing the Latin root and the difference and everything. That's amazing.
Thanks. Yeah.
Love that quote. Thank you. Let's jump ahead to this section. And of course, Joe, your roots started as an entertainer. I'm an entertainer, and I think that you'd agree that this industry can be one of the most subjective, brutally honest, personally emotional industries in existence. And you know as well as I that in order to create and have a successful career in this industry, like you're having now, takes a lot of dedication and hard work. And while, yeah, there's an outrageous amount of fun and excitement doing what we do, there are
Mhm.
also our fair share of obstacles, challenges, and failures we are inevitably going to experience and we're going to have to move forward through. So tell us, what is one key challenge, obstacle, or failure you've experienced throughout your career? And how did you come out the other side better because of it?
Gosh, it's such a good question. And the idea of the amount of rejection that we have to handle and
Mm,
how emotional we are as performers, part of our job and our makeup, and us being sensitive is probably part of what makes us good at what we do.
yeah.
So the idea of being sensitive to rejection, it hurts. And I think for me, it's been understanding my relationship to what failure means and my relationship to what rejection actually looks like.
Mm,
So what I mean by that is when I first started out, I was really fortunate. I had those two jobs right away. That gave me a lot of confidence because my confidence was rooted in something outside of me, which is external success. But then also, then I started seeking external success. I started seeking booking because who wouldn't want to book? And I started
right.
seeking validation. Like, am I on the right path? Am I, when I'm in class, my teacher tells me things, gives me feedback. Sometimes we don't get those when we go into the room. So I was trying to make sense of it. If I didn't book the job and I didn't get good feedback, what does it mean? How do I know if I'm doing better? And so a lot of it had to do with the idea of failure has to be decoupled from external result. Because when we think about it, even if 25 people audition for something and 4 people are called back or sent along, that's 4 people that are options for this. 75% of those people are not going to get the job because only one person
Right.
can get it. So I cannot for me, I cannot any longer make the indicator of how I'm doing. So I had to decouple failure from not getting the job, and failure had to be reframed. So it was a sports psychologist that introduced the idea of failure might not be about making mistakes. Failure might not be about the result. Failure might be about the lack of going for it. And so I've had to develop this relationship of what does it feel like to be me when I'm at my best? And what does it feel like to go for it? Because the only time that I'm ever okay with not getting the job is if I did everything that I wanted to do, everything I set out to do. Did I have a clear take? Was I passionate about it? Did I have fun? Did I feel like myself? That checklist is what I use to measure. And I've found that more times than not, if I am able to bring those 4 things with me into the room, that the results start to take care of themselves.
Yeah.
I think that was one of the biggest things.
Yeah. And that was hands down the most eloquent way that I've ever heard that explained. And what comes up in the podcast, a lot of people talk about, booking their, their first Broadway show, right? The very common input is that, look, there are so many things out of our control when we get into those rooms with in front of that panel, the casting director, the producers, whoever's there, that you cannot bog yourself down with that external validation from them because you can't control that. The only thing you can do is be you and show up and doing your work to the best of your ability and then leaving and letting it go. Everyone that I've spoken with, really, that has booked something big, something they're super proud of, they can reflect on those moments. And that's exactly what they were doing. They prepared properly. They showed up. They were present. They were themselves. They didn't try to seek validation. They just said, okay, this is what I've got for you. This is me. And they left. And that is what led ultimately into them booking and getting that external validation. But that's not what was being sought after in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, really, really good.
Did you know building industry relationships are the most important assets you need to create a long-lasting entertainment career? And don't take my word for it. Guest after guest here on the podcast have attributed some of their biggest career moments to their relationships. That is why you need to get yourself inside the You Booked It community. You'll learn what you need to do to get noticed and make sure your headshot stays in the callback pile so you can book the gig more consistently and create a successful career. Tap the link in the show notes or go to youbookeditpodcast.com/invite to get inside free today.
Let's move on to a time that I like to call your spotlight moment. That one moment in time that you realized, yes, I am going to be an entertainer for a living, or maybe it was, yes, this is what I need to be doing in this industry. Tell us about that.
Well, there was a period of time when I was mainly, an early artist, and I'd only really had one teacher. And at a certain point, I started to feel like that feels good, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. I don't even think I thought about what I wanted to do for the rest of my life or what I wanted to do for college. I just knew I wanted to go to an acting camp. And there was an acting camp upstate New York in Loch Sheldrake called Stage Door Manor. And a lot of notable actors had come out of this summer camp. And so I begged and borrowed and worked to save up to go to this acting camp. And when I got there, I started to meet the actors who were constantly getting the leads in their plays at other high schools from all around the country and maybe even internationally. And I was intimidated. I started to look around and go, oh, wow, this is what it feels like to be in a group of people that are very good at what they do. And something happened that summer, which was there was a search on for the 2 young boys in the Broadway show Lost in Yonkers. And they were looking for the 2 kids to play the 2 roles, the brothers. And casting director comes up from New York, Jay Binder comes up from New York, and he auditions the entire camp of boys. Anybody who's in the age range, he auditions them. And they put up the list for callbacks. And they had a second round of callbacks, and then a third, and then a fourth. And after the fourth callback, your next move would be to go to meet the creative team in New York. And so after the fourth audition, Jay Binder called me over to his desk and he said, listen, um, there's no way in heck I can cast you as a Jew in the 1940s, but I want to let you know you should keep doing this. And two ironic things came out of that. One is I didn't have much professional experience. So I was like, okay, like I just bounced back from it. I didn't have a history of rejection to add to a story. So
Yeah.
I was just really moved that he said something to me. And the second thing is I proceeded to go back to my high school and got cast as a Jew in the 1940s in The Diary of Anne Frank. It was pretty ironic that. And I think I told my acting teacher from high school that I wanted to go to college for acting. And there was something about that instilled a confidence in me. Maybe I can do this. And so I'll always be
Yeah.
appreciative that he shared that with me instead of he could have just said next.
Of course. Yeah. Amazing. Wonderful. And let's piggyback on that question real quick and talk about your number one booked it moment. Walk us through that day, the auditions and callbacks, if they happen to be a part of it. What was going on in your life? And what about that moment makes it your favorite booked it moment?
I had just moved across the country. My mother, unfortunately, passed away of cancer 2 years before, and my sense of self and my confidence got a little rocked. But I decided to make the leap out to Los Angeles, and I had booked my first job, and I was now a must join for the union. And I got the opportunity to audition for a show called Providence. And it was on NBC show starring Malia Kanakaridis. And I was playing a young artist who basically had gone to live with his grandmother. His parents had died and he was starting to forget what they looked like. And so I really felt like this was a divine opportunity. I felt like I was honoring my mom. I felt like a lot of symbolism in different parts of my life. And I worked very hard at this audition. And in fact, I was supposed to play a young Russian. And I had studied a little bit of dialects at USC, but this was an opportunity to go to Sam French, get a dialogue tape, work with a dialogue coach. And so I went in to first the audition and then the callback, and I was doing this accent. And it didn't have to be flawless, which was nice because he was living in the United States and he just had to be Russian, but it didn't have to be. He was living in Russia.
Right.
And I remember two things. I went into the hallway. I had been there before for the audition. That was the callback. And I had my agent's voice in my head, which was sign in and get the heck out of there. Don't start chit-chatting with others. You're not there for that. It's not social hour. So go off and do your thing. And so I had this brown journal and I went off and I started sketching. I wanted to put myself into the play space of what this artist might be going through. And I saw somebody audition for this role and it's somebody I respected a lot. So all of a sudden I was like, oh, maybe this means that this type of opportunity that I belong here. So I took that moment and I went back to my sketching and I went in the room and the creator of the show and the writer of the episode and the casting director were all there. And they had me do the audition. They threw a note at me. They had me do it again. And then they said, thanks so much. And I left and they came running down the hall after me and asked me to come back. And when they asked me to come back, they said, hey, can you do the audition again, but without the accent? I said, sure. And so I did the audition a third time, this time with no accent. And there was a look on someone's face in the room that I could tell they were appreciative that I'd taken the note. That's as far as I would take it. But when I got my page, I'm going to date myself. I got a page. I pulled over to the side of the road. I raced to a payphone and I called my agent. The fact that I had booked this top of show guest star opposite Melina Kanakaridis in this beautiful episode that felt like it was honoring my mother, it really it made me feel like I could belong and it made me feel like I could do really rigorous roles. And it was really meaningful to me. And I loved my experience on that show.
Oh, amazing. What a fantastic story. Really love that. Thank you for sharing.
Sure.
Let's take a moment to talk about the present. What projects are you working on now? What are you looking forward to? And hey, we're still kind of amidst this global pandemic, right? It's kind of coming, it's going, coming and going. How do you see the entertainment industry moving forward in the next couple of years?
Such good questions. Spent a lot of time thinking about these. So I just got back from Hawaii where I had my first job since this global pandemic started. And it's the sequel to a zombie movie. It hasn't been announced yet, so I can't talk too much about it, but it was really exciting to be in a place among creatives mostly in outdoors. I didn't have any real indoor scenes to do, but where we were in this little sort of independent production, we're standing in the footprints of King calm. We're looking up at where Lost was shot. Like we were in this beautiful outdoor space called Kualo Ranch, and pretty much everything that's been shot in the island of Oahu, big budget movies were shot there. So there was something about being in the experience and dealing with COVID testing and being mindful of collaborating with others and getting back into a flow that was incredibly meaningful. So coming back from that, coupling that with what I'm offering as a coach and what I'm offering as a teacher in our company, we're really interested in how do we train to sustain and how do we train to adapt. So those are two things that whether we're working over Zoom or we're working in person or working in a combination, how do we have consistency? So I just got back from 2 weeks in Toronto. It was my first time traveling back to Canada, and we were working at George Brown College. And George Brown is a really wonderful theater school. In some ways, I tried to make sense of likening it to our NYU. And I got to work with the second year students and spent 2 weeks with them. And it was a combination of, there were some Meisner teachers, and then it was Meisner and mindset. And so what we're attempting to do is help people deal with head noise. We're helping people train confidence in the way they talk to themselves. We're trying to help people deal with the optimal amount of stress, because stress actually helps our performance. So when it comes to having no stress and no interest and almost an apathy, we think that might help us. I wasn't nervous at all, but it turns out that energy is actually fuel. So if it's too much for us, then we can get overwhelmed and we get dysregulated. And if it's not enough, we may not care and we might not have the juice we need. And so how do we sustain and how do we adapt? And so a big part of what I'm practicing is always working a little bit off balance. How do we train for the unknown? I think I spent about the decade trying to work in optimal conditions. My acting class was my safe place. I was with my favorite teacher and my favorite colleagues, working in my favorite technique, in my favorite environment. But then you go into the world in an audition room or on set and things are different. And so I started to realize, gosh, I'm just hoping for the best when I go out there. But when I looked at what elite athletes do, and when I looked at even like performers that go audition for places like Juilliard, they're constantly throwing wrinkles at themselves so that they can prepare for the unknown, right? That other quote, smooth seas do not make a skilled sailor. So whether it's in my own audition space or whether it's coaching sessions or when I'm teaching, I'm seeking how do we train and prepare our minds for the unknown and to be adaptable. And so those are the two things that I'm really working on.
Oh, fantastic. Really great. And can you talk about your company just a little bit about, you hit on it a little bit because you were up in Toronto doing that, but can you expand a little bit on what your company does?
Sure. It's so strange to say company because just a few short years ago, there were two of us and we were teaching an acting class, but it wasn't about acting. We assume that actors have a technique and that they like that technique. And what we were really interested in was, how do we deal with the head noise that inevitably comes up before and after an audition, and sometimes during? And so we created our inaugural Intro to Mindset program. And within that class, 90% of the people said, will you continue this? So we added another round. And the person I created it with is a woman named Hilary Tuck, who is an extraordinary actress. She was on Honey, I Shrunk the Kids with the late Peter Scolari, who just passed for many years. And growing up as a child actor, nodded our head to all the ways we got tripped up in auditioning throughout the years. And we wanted to create a program to address the things that don't normally get addressed in acting programs and acting schools. And we had an athlete who came and took one of our classes, and he was like, you got to come talk to this, group of young high school quarterbacks. And these were 17-year-olds who were about to go play for the top 24 colleges in the United States. So they were going to Alabama, Texas, USC, and Georgia. And they basically were saying, hey, we walk on a campus, we're handed an Instagram account with 70,000 followers. And media training may not happen till later in our careers, but many of us haven't worked on camera. What is it like performing on the world stage? So we came in and worked with them a little bit and started to realize, gosh, we are so excited to learn sports psychology, to teach actors about mental toughness and how to sustain and the science behind these best practices. But then athletes could really use help with being vulnerable and media training. And we thought the intersection of art and sport was so important. But then we realized, gosh, executives need this work too, because they're constantly looking to hire ex-coaches and athletes to come in and be motivational. And sometimes they hire improvisers to come in and teach them how to be more creative. And so we had a colleague who was training scientists on how to perform better using the rules of improvisation. And so the three of us started teaching workshops, and then we brought in another person. And here we have this collection of about 7 of us who during the day still audition, still work, still do our craft. So we're not 20 to 40 years removed from the industry. And anything we're teaching, we're trying out during the day and then sharing at night. So we've started developing these weekend intensives that turn into training courses that last about 6 weeks long. And then we're also challenging ourselves to do things better than they've ever been done before by us. So we have a growth mindset about trying new things. And so we've now developed about 35 programs. And those programs are on the cusp of being recorded so that we can share them with people far and wide. But in the meantime, we usually host these workshops and online programs. And so our company started out in Los Angeles and expanded up to Toronto and now in Vancouver. And we're heading to the East Coast, Atlanta and New York this coming year. And we couldn't be more excited. We everywhere we go, people are like, where were these 20 years ago? So we feel like this information, people are hungry for it. They really appreciate the way in which it's presented. We try to keep things fun and science-backed and practical. So that's a bit about the performer's mindset.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you for sharing. Very valuable resource for all of us. And it is now time to move on to one of my favorite sections in the interview. I call it the Grease Lightning Round.
Woohoo.
I am going to ask you a handful of questions. I want you to answer them as quickly and concisely as possible, one after another. Are you ready?
Yes, I am ready.
Good. First question. What was the one thing holding you back from committing to a career as an entertainer?
Fear.
Second question. What is the best piece of advice you have ever received?
Bring something into the room. Don't go in with an empty cup expecting your cup to be filled.
Oh, really great. Third question. What is something that is working for you right now?
Making a lot of mistakes, risking and making a lot of mistakes. It's the only way I can learn, and it's the only way I can grow.
Fourth question. What is your best resource, whether that is a book, a movie, a YouTube video, maybe a podcast or piece of technology you found is helping your career right now?
I would say the podcast Finding Mastery with Dr. Michael Gervais, a sports psychologist. It's where a lot of the science practices were first sparked in me that led to books and magazine articles and TED Talks. That's probably the number one resource and starting place, and got a bunch more, but that's the starting place.
Great. Fifth question. If you had to start your career from scratch, but you still had all the knowledge and experience you've collected from your career in the industry, what would you do or not do? Would you do anything differently, or would you keep it the same?
I think it would be impossible to keep it the same because I'd be starting anew instead of having my experience before. I think the thing that I would really do is prioritize a sustainable life, meaning I have work that I do in between my auditions that sustains me emotionally, spiritually, financially. And I think I struggled so much with the 5 odd jobs and the stress and strain financially that came from that early on. And I think the people that I've seen that have created a sustainable life outside of it, they seem to be having more consistent and sustained success now.
Really good. And the last question. What is the golden nugget knowledge drop you've learned from your successful career in the industry you'd like to leave with our listeners?
The golden nugget that I want to leave behind. Yeah. So it's super simple, which is do you, but the things that come up around that are pretty intense. I think the main source of anxiety for people is scanning for what other people might be thinking. And that's been articulated as FOPO, the fear of other people's opinions. And so it comes back to what you said that you've been gleaning from all the conversations with people throughout the industry, which is bring in your take. And so I think it's simple, do you, but it's complicated in terms of we make it complicated and it can be hard or challenging to trust it. And to me, that's the gold nugget is, when I hear gold, I hear alchemy, and I think about the philosopher's stone and the idea that the secret to the universe can be written on one stone. So that stone might say, do you?
Yes, love it. Do you? And to wrap up this interview, Joe, it is time to give yourself a plug. Where can we find you? How do our listeners connect with you? Is there anything you want to promote?
Sure. Yeah. You can find me on all the usual suspects social media platforms at me, Joe Towne. But my podcast, the Better Podcast, was born out of two things. One, all the work that we're doing at the Performers Mindset. Sometimes I'm coaching an executive or an athlete or a student privately. And so I can't share those conversations, but I wanted to have conversations I could share. And so I sought out 12 perspectives, 12 creative perspectives in and around different industries. So whether it's a chef rooted in ancient Italian cuisine based in Tuscany, or musicians that have toured the world with Tom Petty and Leonard Cohen, or whether it's somebody who was a creative catalyst for Nike, we have these different perspectives, and we're about halfway through our first season. And by the end of the season, I hope that the entire library will create a constellation perspective that people will hear similar themes over and over again and start to be able to apply those to their own lives, their careers, their relationships, and what does better mean to you?
Brilliant. Love that. And for everyone listening out there, I have put the links to everything Joe just talked about into the description of this episode so you can easily connect with him. And also be sure to share this podcast with your fellow entertainers, coaches, teachers, arts and entertainment educators, and anyone you know aspiring to create a career in the entertainment industry. You Booked It is the #1 resource of expertise on how to actually create a successful entertainment career. Case in point, everything Joe shared with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. Joe, thank you so much for joining me. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the show to get so much of your expertise. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Dane, thank you. And I truly appreciate what you're doing, what you're seeking, and thank you for the gift of your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening today. If you enjoyed this episode and want more like it, be sure to smash that subscribe button. Also, be sure to join the You Booked It community. Inside, you can connect with your people, build industry relationships, unlock unlimited masterclasses, and access the tools and training you need to create sustainable career momentum. Get your invite link right now. Tap the link in the show notes or head over to youbookeditpodcast.com/invite, and we'll see you there.